Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the February 28th, 2022 meeting of the City of Santa Barbara State Street Advisory Committee. It's been since early January since we last met. Seems like a very long time, so it's really pleased to see everybody's faces here today. And we will start today with a roll call, noting that Mr. Landvik will be late. Greta, you want to do the roll call, please?
Yes, indeed. We have Chair Dave Davis.
Here.
Vice Chair Ken Saxon.
Here.
Michael Becker.
Here.
Diane Meester Black.
Here.
Hillary Blackerby. Here. Roxanna Bonderson.
Here.
Marge Caffarelli.
Here.
Roger Durling.
Ahoy.
Nader Ehrman.
Here.
Robin Elander.
Here.
Alejandra Gutierrez. Believe she is not present. Megan Harmon.
Here.
Mike Jordan.
Here.
Ed Landvik will be joining late. Peter Lewis.
Here.
Kristen Miller.
Here.
Suzanne Tejada.
Here.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Greta. Agenda review. We have two items on today's agenda. The first will be a brief overview by Tess Harris, our staff member, on the RFP/RFQ status. And there has been a lot of activity in the last month. So looking forward to bringing the board, the committee here up to speed on that. The second item is our first attempt at basically trying some pre-master plan background session of educating us all to the big issues that we're going to be facing when we hit the ground this summer on the master plan itself. That will be a panel discussion regarding the future of retail and commercial spaces downtown and the future of retail and in that regard. I want to go back to our operating principles to think about the fact that we have noted that we need to be future oriented. We needed to be learning from domain experts, and we needed to be ambitious but practical. And I think all three of those principles will come into play today with the session we're hopefully going to have. I'm also basically saying we've set this up as a see how it goes. We've not done it before. We'll do it. We'll look for your feedback afterwards, and obviously make changes in the future to do what works for everybody. So with that, let me go to the approval of the minutes. Are there any announcements today?
Chair Davis, I just have a couple quick announcements. I just wanted to note that the resources page on the SSAC website has been updated. There is the 1964 general plan was scanned and uploaded there. If you haven't read it, it's pretty interesting. There's reference to State Street as a pedestrian area back in 1964. The updated Cosmont report that was prepared for the developer for the Nordstrom's building has also been uploaded. That was emailed to everybody as well. The RFP and the addendums that we'll talk about briefly today have also been uploaded just for informational purposes in case you want to take a look. And then the resources page has been updated with a couple links, including some news articles and the Economic Recovery Extension Transition Ordinance item that went to council back in January. And that is it from my end at this time.
Great, thanks, Tess. Any announcements from any SSAC members? Everybody want to raise their hand? Not seeing any. I will then move on to the
Perhaps
approval of the...
Chair Davis, if you don't mind, I'd just like to make one more announcement.
Oh yeah,
you'll
please.
see there is a new face on here. Timmy Bolton is joining us today as our project planner. Timmy will be working with me starting closer to April-ish timeframe, but we'll be working with all of you and with me on the State Street Master Plan. So I want to welcome him to this meeting. I'm really happy to have him joining us.
Great, welcome aboard, Timmy. I worked with Timmy on the C-Level Rise Committee, so we've got a working relationship and look forward to working with him on this. Okay, item C, approval of the minutes from the January 10th, 2022 meeting. Everybody's had a chance to see them. Is there a motion to approve? Someone wants to raise their hand. You have a raise hand thing down at the bottom of your screen. There you go. Motion to approve by Roger.
Second.
Second by someone. Did I catch that?
Hi, Hillary.
Hillary. Hillary seconded, right? Greta, roll call, please.
Diane Meester Black.
Aye.
Hillary Blackerby.
Aye.
Roxana Bonderson. Roger Durling.
Yes. Aye.
Nadra Erman.
Aye.
Robin Elander.
Aye.
Alejandro Gutierrez is not present, I believe. Megan Harmon.
Yes.
Mike Jordan.
Yes.
I believe Ed Lundvik is not yet joined us. Peter Lewis.
Aye.
Kristen Miller.
Aye.
Suzanne Tejada.
Aye.
Chair Davis.
Aye.
Vice Chair Saxon.
Yes.
Minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Takes us to general public comment. Greta, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak under general public comment? That would be within the purview of this council subcommittee, but not on today's agenda. Greta, is anyone who wishes to raise their hand in this regard?
I'm not seeing, pardon me, we do have one raised hand. It looks like Mitchell Shervin has raised his hand. Mitchell, I don't believe I have the, I'm not able to unmute him. Are you able to unmute him, Tess?
Let me go ahead and see. Yes, Mitchell, you should be able to speak right now.
Yeah, that worked great. Thanks very much.
Here you go. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank everyone for all the time they're taking to put into this incredibly important decision for the future of downtown Santa Barbara and obviously State Street in particular. And I wanted to thank the city council members too that are present for their foresight in solving the public safety concerns of the fire department without undermining the efforts and the work so far done by a lot of the bars and restaurants that have moved outside and trying to make a go of things still while we hopefully wind down this pandemic. But my one comment I would like to make is in a lot of the design guidelines, I've seen most of the sketches, the drawings, the descriptions feature daytime activities. And in fact, a lot of the restaurants in downtown Santa Barbara operate at night, some exclusively. And as you all know, it gets chilly at night in Santa Barbara. And for a good 6 months of the year, most people are having dinner when it's dark and cold outside. And I see a lot of talk about no overhead covering in the original design guidelines. I know they were going to have us removing roofs and having just umbrellas and some limitations on heaters. And I just wanted to point out that the primary objective for most restaurant operators is their guest comfort. And that means we need to have the ability to keep a roof over their head and allow them to stay warm while they enjoy dining al fresco. So I just hope that that would be something that you'd consider while you're taking a look at revising some of those guidelines. And thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mitchell, for your comments. That will then take us into our first agenda item. This is the
Mr. Chair, can I just make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Just quickly, so I don't forget later, because Mitchell mentioned the fire zone. There'll be a hook and ladder demonstration on the 800 block of State Street this Thursday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If any of the committee members wanted to see exactly what a hook and ladder deployment looks like in the center of State Street, that'd be a great time. And if you have grandkids, that'd be even a better time to bring them down there to watch a fire department display. But I know there's been a lot of chatter about the need for the 20-foot versus not the need for the 20-foot. So there's nothing that serves that discussion better than actually seeing what it's like on the ground. So it's this Thursday at 2 o'clock in front of 820, which is the tall building in the 800 block on State Street. Thanks.
Thank you. Really good note and announcement. Thank you for that.
And Chair Davis, I don't see any other raised hands.
Great. Thank you, Greta. Thank you. Then we will move on to the RFP, RFQ status. Ms. Harris, Tess, you want to
Great, thank you.
Bring us up to speed here.
Yes, so I'm just going to give a quick update on kind of what's been going on behind the scenes since we released the RFP, as I briefly mentioned in an email to all of you. There are about 24 days left for bidding on the RFP at this moment. We've had about 100 firms, a little over that, indicate an interest in Planet Bids, which is great. Some of them may become sub-consultants, some may decide not to submit a proposal, but that's still a really great number of interest. And so I wanted to highlight that for all of you. Just as a reminder, we're currently hitting the target that we set out to reach. So the RFP will close in March, and then we'll have the selection process from there. Going into the RFP, RFQ pre-submittal meeting, I just wanted to spend a minute or so of time talking about that. So we had an informational session for consultants on January 28th. It was really well attended. We had about 70 participants. Some of those were staff and some of those were members from the same firms or organizations, but we had over half of that number were separate firms that RSVP'd. So a really good turnout. The meeting was focused on being responsive to the questions that consultants had about the RFP, RFQ. And it became clear in this meeting that consultants had just a number of different questions on the scope of work and wanting to better understand what budget this project might consider. So on this, on the PowerPoint is the link. There is a YouTube video for the informational meeting in case you're interested in seeing the questions and responses from that meeting. And originally, I just wanted to highlight, originally we didn't include a budget in the RFP that all of us reviewed together, and that was intentional. Part of the thought was to try to get sort of the most creative responses without putting a tag on it. However, after we thought about it a little bit further, we realized that that's really something that a consultant is going to want to know in order to be responsive to the proposal. And if we didn't have a target on it, the concern is that we could get proposals that really vary widely in terms of cost, and then we wouldn't really be able to compare the proposals. So during the meeting, we had indicated a range of about $200,000 to $400,000. And there was an addendum that I sent out shortly after the meeting that just highlighted the questions that were raised during the meeting, gave the link to the meeting, and then responded to that budget question that was asked a number of times. And that sent out to everybody that was interested in Planet Bids. So anybody that didn't attend the meeting also received that information. And then we actually did a second addendum. So upon kind of further review of the scope of work and really what we were thinking through, what we're really asking, we realized that range either needed to change in terms of budget, or we needed to change the scope of work to better align with sort of the reality of what the project might cost and what we're anticipating the project might require from a master plan. And so there are a couple major things in the second addendum. The first is a simplified scope of work. So that all of the information that we talked about is still in there. It's still the same, but I moved pieces around slightly to try to condense it a little bit and give some main areas of focus. So you'll see there's one section on urban design framework. There's a section on public outreach and engagement, a section on research and analysis of existing conditions, along with the technical studies. There's a budget section now in there. And then some of the sections that remained were implementation, deliverables, and decision maker hearings. We did also increase the budget and ask that that proposals come in at or below an $800,000 target. And that the goal of that is really so that we can get proposals that are more similar in nature to each other and see how people are responding differently to the RFP. And so just to kind of highlight the status. So the other part of that second addendum was that we extended the timeline for when the RFP, RFQ would close to 3 weeks after when it was originally set to close. So it now is going to be closing on March 24th. The question and answer period has been extended to March 16th. We're still on track. I don't anticipate the dates for interviews and selection or contract authorization or project kickoff to change, but we did feel that changing the date was important, especially given the change in budget and the responses to questions that consultants had. And then we also received about, I think it was 17 or 18 questions through Planet Bids. I responded to all of those as well. There were different questions, some of them related to budget, some related to the scope of work or what technical studies might be needed. Some of the questions were more focused on what the ideal team makeup might look like from the consultant side. And so you're welcome to take a look at those responses. Those are in the resources page as well for the State Street Advisory Committee. But really we're looking for a firm to tell us what we need and to provide us with the team that they feel is best suited to respond to this, the State Street Master Plan RFP. And so with that, before we go into public comment, I just wanted to take a moment. I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has questions on the status. The other thing I just wanted to highlight was that I plan to come back throughout the process. So you'll be hearing an update on the RFP over each month for the next couple months from me, just so you are all kept in the loop of what's happening on that. And hopefully we'll have somebody on board soon. Let's see. Okay.
I got Suzanne's got her hand up and Michael's got his hand up. Suzanne, you want to go with your question?
Sure. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but could you explain a little bit about the interview and selection process that you as a city will be doing, and what would our involvement be? Sure.
So it's going to be somewhat dependent on the number of responses that we receive. I'm hoping that we're going to receive a number of responses. What I anticipate is doing kind of an initial review of all of the proposals and sifting through which ones are responding to the proposal first off, or which ones may not be, and trying to condense that number a little bit. That'll be done with staff internally. So Eli, myself, and there may be a couple others that will pull in. And then depending on that round, then we'll go into an interview process. That could be one round of interviews, or it could be multiple rounds of interviews. Again, that's sort of dependent on the number of consultants that are responding. We will have Dave and Ken join us if they're available for those. And then we'll have staff on the interview panels as well. And then depending on what is being presented, if there are very large changes that are different from what was presented to the State Street Advisory Committee, then certainly we would come back and discuss that before moving forward. And then each month I'll be giving you an update. The next month, our meeting is March 21st and it closes on March 24th. So I might have an initial understanding of what we've received by then, but since it won't be closed, there may not be a large update in March. So I'll follow that up with an email after it closes, and then we can chat further in April.
And then the selection will be the city council then votes on that with recommendations from staff?
Correct. Yes. So yeah, good question, Suzanne. So staff will go through an interview process and work on negotiating a contract with a consultant or firms or group of firms that we believe would be best suited for the State Street Master Plan. And then that would be taken to City Council for their contract authorization. And so council would have the final say at that point.
Thank you very much.
Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And for Tess or Timmy, I was just curious if the master plan will be subject to CEQA. And if it is, just to put that on the radar, just so it doesn't happen at the end, and probably if you could do an EIR or whatever is necessary for the second half of the State Street planning process, complete the EIR at the same time.
Yes, yeah, great point, Michael. Yes, I am aware of the CEQA review that likely will need to occur as part of the master plan. Staff will be working on that sort of behind the scenes as we move through the process with a consultant, but we will need to do that in tandem.
Anybody else? Tess, you're doing great work in this regard. Thank you for moving along. Thank you for keeping us updated as we go forward. Hey, let's move into something which I'm pretty excited about, see how this plays in my regard. Our next item, go ahead.
Shortly
Matt?
before we do have to take public comment on the
That's
RFP
right.
item. I know
Greta,
it seems like more of an announcement, but
No. You guys remind me when I miss it. Okay. I'm excited to get to our next item. Gotta hold me back. Greta, are there anyone who wishes to speak on that item?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we do have a member of the public who raised their hand.
Great.
Ruben Pena, I will unmute you. Just a moment here. And you'll be able to unmute yourself and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. So Ruben Pena, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we pressed that by mistake.
Thank you. We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, pressed that by mistake. We're just interested in listening to the plan.
Oh, I understand. Thank you.
Sorry.
Anytime you want to raise a question, please go ahead, Greta.
If any other member of
else.
Yeah, if any other member of the public wishes to make a public comment, please press the raised hand icon. I'll call on you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. If you're connecting by phone, hit *9 to raise and lower your hand, *6 to unmute yourself. And I do not see any other raised hands. Thank you so much.
Okay, no, thank you again for pulling me back. Bring me back off the precipice. Here we go. Panel discussion about the future of retail and commercial spaces, challenges and opportunities ahead for downtown revitalization. Today, we have a very distinguished panel of individuals that I know when we contacted each of them, they were excited for coming to be involved with our process and us specifically. So I can't tell you, that really pleased me because there's a lot of excitement about our charge out there in the community. And our member, Marge Caffarelli, Marge has agreed to basically moderate this panel. So I'm going to turn this thing over to Tess and to Marge at this point to get us started. Marge, thank you ahead of time for the effort and time you put into this.
Thank you, Dave. It's my pleasure. It's a great group. Tess, do you want me to go ahead?
maybe if you don't mind, Marge, I'll just kick it off and then I'll turn it over to you.
Okay.
I just wanted to highlight real quick that this is the first panel, as Dave mentioned earlier, that we're looking to have. We're looking to have panels potentially in the next couple months as well. But really it's intended to engage all of you, be creative, and for all of us to have a thoughtful conversation between the panelists that we have with us today and the State Street Advisory Committee members. And we want to really get your feedback and learn from tonight so that we can continue to bring panel discussions that are interesting and engaging during the next meeting. So please email me or give me your criticisms or feedback after the meeting. That's fine. And I just wanted to highlight, really grateful for Marge for stepping in as the moderator role. So very fortunate to have her in that role. And then I wanted to highlight, we do have, I'll turn it over to Marge, but we have some great panelists that you'll see in just a moment. And then I'm gonna ask if everybody could turn off their cameras with the exception of Marge and the 4 panelists so that while they have a discussion, we can see each of the panelists a little bit more clearly. We're gonna have a unique format for the panel. So Marge has 3 main questions that she plans to ask, perhaps with some follow-ups. And each panelist will have the opportunity to answer each question. And then after responses to each of the questions, we're going to open it up to the SSAC for questions and comments. So you can think of it kind of as a 3-part panel. We'll stop after each question for all of your questions and comments. You can chime in with your thoughts as well. And then Marge, Dave, Ken, and myself will keep track of the time and let us know when it's time to move on to the next item. But we really have the next hour and a half for this item. So my hope is that this will be a really engaging discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marge to get us started.
Thank you, Tess. And I would like to also welcome the panelists. We do have a distinguished group of folks that have agreed to sort of be a guinea pig in this inaugural panel. Peter Lewis, developer here in Santa Barbara. Peter Rupert, director of the UCSB Economic Forecast Project and professor of economics at UCSB. Amy Cooper with Santa Barbara Better Together. Amy is doing economic development with this group. Bob Tueller, founder and principal of Radius Commercial Real Estate and Investments. And me, Marge Caffarelli. My previous life, I was the developer of Alma del Pueblo and the Santa Barbara Public Market in downtown Santa Barbara. So with that, I would like to ask each of the panelists, and I'd like to start with Amy, to give us a little background about themselves and how their background relates to retail, commercial real estate, and/or economic development. So Amy, why don't we kick off with you?
Thank you, Marge. I didn't even know we were guinea pigs, but yeah, let's do this. Amy Cooper here with the Santa Barbara Better Together group. And my background, as probably most of you know, was as far as retail. I founded my store Plum Goods on State Street in 2010. That was 2,000 square feet on State. And then I doubled it to 4,000 square feet about 6 years later. And then I closed my business due to the pandemic in 2020. But since then, not only during that time, I started getting really involved with city issues on the board of downtown Santa Barbara and serving on a lot of committees and I also in 2018 was on a panel and gave a speech about economic development and then ended up creating the top 25 list of ways to revitalize Santa Barbara, downtown Santa Barbara. That was in 2018. So that document that I wrote and presented to council ended up turning into a lot of different committees and also led to the hiring of Jason Harris as our first economic development position within the city. So since the pandemic, I've been working on economic development, business recruitment and retention, and working with businesses, specifically retail, but some other also food and bev and other retail, other business types of businesses from the waterfront all the way up to the 1300 block. So I've been lucky to be really involved in everything going on downtown, and I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you, Amy. Peter Lewis, how about a little background on you?
So I've been here since I came here in '82 out of college, actually, after spending a year in Europe. And I had an economics degree and came here working for my brother, and shortly thereafter started a clothing manufacturing company. And as it grew, ironically, the cheapest space in town was the 400 block of State Street, which is still zoned commercial manufacturing. So ironically, the core of the old downtown, century-year-old downtown, was the cheapest industrial or light manufacturing space in town. At that time, the 400 block was automobile dealerships and nightclubs and my business and auto supply store. And then I did that up until '95. There was wretched just turmoil in the industry around that time where all the goods started to go offshore in terms of manufacturing. So I actually stayed in that industry for another 20 years almost and got out of manufacturing, but went into direct mail and got involved in some ownership of a couple of catalog companies that you may know of, one being Sundance and the other being Athleta. And was in those companies up until about 2008, where we sold those. I haven't been involved in retail really since '08 in a direct fashion, only in the way that I am a property owner, and I own retail currently on the 400 block, 600 block. I own retail in other cities as well, and with everything from shopping center to some downtown small retail stores. So I look forward to ways that we can see the evolution of our downtown, and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Peter. Peter Rupert, it's great to see you. How about
Hi,
sharing
Marge.
a little of your background?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a economic professor at UCSB. I run the Economic Forecast Project. I've been doing so for now about a little over 10 years. And, you know, I don't own retail, but I'm involved very deeply in the community with the Economic Forecast Project. What I want to mention is I want to thank everyone, by the way, for being on this committee and doing this. I know the kind of work you're doing. And you know, what I do is I get lots of local data and I try to analyze it. So I want you to use me as a resource if you need to get data, whatever it is you need. I'm more than happy to, to assist in that. Having said that, like I said, I do talk a lot to businesses downtown, and both in the restaurant industry and retail. Amy and I have talked a while back a few times. And the problem, that I see, which I guess we'll talk about later, is, you'd think maybe there'd be one person who didn't have a horror story to tell me about trying to do business on State Street. So I think that I'm really looking forward to the discussion and hearing what the other panelists have to say, as well as questions.
Thank you, Peter. I think that your macroeconomic opinions and research will be very useful in this conversation as well. Has Bob Tueller joined us? Okay. Well, why don't we get started? The current opportunity that the city of Santa Barbara has to rethink downtown is a once in a generation opportunity, I do believe. And I think most people here today believe that as well. So my first question is, the current State Street closure has created a major change to our downtown. And there's a lot to be learned from the closing of State Street. What are your top takeaways? What do you think we've learned over the last 2 years that State Street's been closed? And Amy, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Marge. Yeah, I would say my number one top takeaway is that closing the street is not a panacea to making the street vibrant and healthy and dynamic. Closing the street is one thing, but that doesn't solve homelessness, cleanliness, safety, lighting, vacancy rate, or having a good business mix, much less it also puts a lot more pressure on mobility and transportation and flow and how we're getting people from the waterfront up through all our different districts in Santa Barbara. So I would say that, of course, the closure really was important for restaurants, but that's the second takeaway, is that this street closure in general does not do well for retail. And that's not just true in Santa Barbara. That was just quoted in an article from Ventura. People tend to walk down the middle and miss the doorways. The parklets push people out. And again, for retail, it's much more of a struggle. So it's looking at, what lessons can we learn from the shutdown in our own town? And then where can we look to neighboring towns and see how they've handled it and how they're handling the issue of parklets, street closure, mobility, parking, transportation. So it's a mix, but it's frustrating sometimes when I've heard in council meetings or I'm not blaming council, but in city meetings that, everything's fine because we shut the street down. So it's all okay now. And I think we know that that's not true. There's a lot more issues we need to address. And specifically for retail, I don't think it's sustainable to have a 13 block long food court. So we really need to pay attention to how we have a diverse mix of shopping and dining and experiential services up and down the street.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, Santa Barbara has a really long downtown, 13 blocks. I think it's unusually long. Peter, I'd love to hear from you.
Lewis or Rupert?
I'm sorry, I've got two Peters, I forgot. Peter Rupert first.
Great. Well, I wish I hadn't gone second, because Amy said what I wanted to say a little bit, which is, I think we should really make it very clear. It's not about shutting State Street down to cars. That's, as I said, I have a couple pictures, and if you guys want to see just a couple pictures of what I mean, I don't know if I can share my screen yet, Tess.
Peter, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, so it would be here, okay. This is a place, this is in Istanbul, it's a place called Kuzgunchuk. There are no rules or regulations, zero. I mean, it's like, there's no planning, there's no anything. This is an amazingly vibrant place it's not downtown Istanbul, it's like in the outskirts a little bit. This is what it looks like yesterday. It's cold there, it's kind of, it's bustling, it's crazy. This is on Sunday, yesterday, in Burlingame Avenue up in San Mateo County. What I want to point out is that if you look to the left of this, the street's not closed. And by the way, Istanbul, those streets weren't closed either. The street's not closed to cars. You can see the somewhat parklit. They've taken a few parking spaces. Again, this is, yesterday on Burlingame Avenue. On the whole length of the street, there's one vacancy, one, and it's already been let and ready to go. So again, this is street open. Couple shops, small shops, something like Amy probably had, smaller variety, clothing stores, really cool. I went to the high school with the two owners of this, by the way. But this is a picture from the street side now, looking at that crepe vine that I showed you here. Here. So this is just looking the other way, onto what it looks like. And you see what they've done. I mean, the city there was pretty sure that this was going to be a permanent type of relationship rather than just a temporary, we're going to open up outdoors. I want to see State Street look like this. I want small mom and pop shops. I want to be able to figure out how to do that. I think that the cost of entering business, and you can talk to Amy about that or many other business owners, is exorbitant. So we're not going to have places like this. We're not going to have little fruit stands on State Street. That's my concern. So I think what we need to do is separate the issue. To me, the issue is not whether or not State Street is closed to cars. It's how we're going to look at how we're going to let restaurants, be outdoors. And Amy's exactly right. Those pictures I showed you, people are walking down the sidewalk in between the outdoor space and retail shops. So, I think there's a lot to do. And again, I don't know what we're supposed to compare this to. When we say revitalize State Street or do whatever, what will State Street look like when we want it to look like, what we want it to look like? And back to what Peter Lewis said, State Street's going to change, maybe not, every year, but every few years, things develop. And if it's not ready to develop and quickly change from a restaurant to a retail shop, vice versa, make it easy for them to do that, it's going to be a tough road to hoe. So tough road to hoe.
So Peter, in showing those photos, you show wide street, much wider streets than State Street has.
No.
In some cases, I mean, Burlingame.
It's a little wider. But again, my whole point was, we really shouldn't focus on whether or not it's close to cars.
Right. No. But what I'm saying is that transportation and planning and transportation planning will all play a role in this, in terms of, if some maybe 3 streets could be closed and some open. I mean, there's going to be, through this master planning process, a real, you can't look at the 13 blocks as one thing. You have to break it down, I think. Would you agree with that?
Probably Peter was going to say that, but we have microeconomies. We have about 11 microeconomies up and down the street, and also looking at those and seeing, okay, where does the street shut down? I know that's not the only point, Peter, but where does it work or where doesn't it work? But also to your point, Peter, it's like that idea that we can't have cars and have parklets and have all these other things. We need to have people moving up and through. I mean, the Boulder Mall, people love to use that. That's 3 blocks long. And even at the Boulder Mall, they landscape the center all the way out to push people to the doorways. And same with Santa Monica, they had a real trouble, they had to push people to the doorways. So looking at the different microeconomies we have and not treating it all as one solution, having a nuanced solution to the street.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
But
Peter Lewis?
I will just say,
Oh.
I don't want to be Santa Monica 3rd Street, okay?
No.
But
Please,
yeah,
for the love of God. Do you know how many consultants they've hired? But I mean, people have said, well, see, we should do it because Santa Monica did it. And that has
I know.
not been actually successful.
no,
Right.
it has not.
Peter Lewis?
So I think Amy's really made a great point on diverse. I think the takeaway is, and the future that Peter's really talking about is, our downtown's going to have to feel local for it to prosper and for it to be sustainable. And we have a fundamental problem. If you really look at the inventory, we have too much retail. And frankly, we've had too much since the Paseo Nuevo was put in. When it was put in, a lot of us thought that this city could be a better shopping city, that it would bring more shoppers to its core, more like South Coast Plaza does. And the reality is it never happened. So many of us that really thought it, in fact, that it would bring Santa Barbara to a different level of retail, it just didn't happen. So it brought business into its core, struggled because of the economics of completing such an expensive project. And as a result, we ended up with too much retail downtown. Nordstrom's, I was selling to that store for a good decade when they were in there. That was always one of their worst stores per foot. Macy's, it was a C store, one of the worst. The Saks here never performed. I. Magnin was here before that, closed because it couldn't generate sales per foot. So the thing that Santa Barbara needs to get real about, or we need to address when we're studying this, is the demographics actually are misleading. They look better than they are. And as a result, you'd think the retailers could really do well if you look at the numbers, but the numbers are really quite misleading. A lot of the money is spent out of town, not in our town. And part of that's because it's not very interesting. So a retail experience. And back to your original question, Marge, on my takeaway, I think it shows that change is good, is my big takeaway. And that I love our city is being open to trying to figure out where we should go and what we want to be. And so I think it's been a great experiment in that I commend the city for the risk that they took and the expedience that they took. So addressing Peter's concern too, that's never been this thing that city's done well. Now I developed a 400 block of State Street, just talking about the timing that Peter was talking about to get something done. When I was in the manufacturing business in the 90s, I went to the city. Dave was running the community development at that time. And I needed a 4-story building, including the subterranean parking, built ASAP. And we actually processed a 4-story building and built it in just under 18 months. Now you can't get entitled in 18 months anymore. So, you know, at that time, it was a pretty responsive city. They developed the Paseo Nuevo very quickly. So we have to get back to a greater sense of urgency and realize the beauty of change can bring. But I would also, my other big takeaway from the current condition of State Street is that line of sight for a good shopping experience, all the great cities that I know in Europe that we all know, Firenze, Rome, Paris, Barcelona, the streets that are fun to shop, they have great sight lines. You see the windows from across the street. You have a sense of a place and not kind of a festival, which it feels now to me. So I think I think what we need to take from all of this is to have an extremely open mind and to really realize we got too much retail. It's going to have to morph into other uses. And you can already see some of that where we're getting some people filling in with different uses. And I think we got to be assuming that. And perhaps the biggest driver of change will be if we can get some housing to start to bring people downtown so that retail will have a basic framework of traffic and expenditures. And you need those bodies within a walking experience to really have it be vital.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about eyes on the street. Having housing downtown creates that energy. You know, one of the things I think that people, when you talk about demographics, that people underestimate is that Santa Barbara is 90,000 people. You know, we're not in a major metropolitan area, and it's not so densified at all. So it's very difficult when you think about now, when you go out with all of the smaller communities, you can get to about what, 225,000, maybe 250. I'm not quite sure about that number, but it's very difficult. And, you know, having like you're not going to have one retailer open 5 locations in Santa Barbara. And so, you know, finding folks to come in can sometimes be difficult that are mom and pops and not the chains. And so I think it's very important. I think Peter Ruppert, you made a really great point about vitality, mom and pops. I know downtown Burlingame really, really well. It's been very, very successful, and it has become even more successful actually as a result of what they've done with the pandemic. So thank you all for that. And has Bob Tuller joined us? Okay, so
He has not yet, Marge. I'm still trying to get in touch with him.
Okay, no worries. So would it be fair to say that the folks that have benefited the most, and I just, you know, yes, no, would the folks that have benefited the most from the closure have not been retail, but have been the restaurants?
Yeah, and we have data to back that up, and we did a downtown survey specifically of our owners downtown, and the answer was yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And bars, I mean.
Well, yeah, food and beverage.
Okay, right. So having said what we've said today so far, downtown property uses are changing or need to change, actually. You've got a Nordstrom that is now going to be repositioned, you know, a huge building. You've got Macy's, and these are all part of, and this is my opinion, are all part of an obsolete 1980s mall. Okay, these massive buildings. So in a thriving downtown, in a thriving Santa Barbara downtown of the future, how do you imagine property uses and tenant mixes being? Now, you know, at the Santa Barbara Public Market, we did something very different, right? We put small tenants under one roof. And so we've got these big buildings, we've got larger retail on State Street, you know, 2,500 square feet, 3,000 square feet, and then you've got, you know, 300,000 square foot buildings. So how do you view these buildings being repositioned? And I'd like to start with Peter Ruppert.
Look, Marge, that's a great question. You know, those buildings, like you said, are archaic. They're old dinosaurs. You know, if it were up to me, they would be demolished. And I think repurposing them is so hard. It's going to be so crazy. I mean, you know, jamming, you know, people in for office space into the Macy's building. You know, I think the future, and I think, you know, there's been, I don't know how many charrettes have been done, you know, but, you know, a really nice mix of, you know, retail space, you know, restaurants, maybe some offices on the second floor, and, condos or, apartments or something, on the third floor to get people down there. Peter Lewis is exactly right in talking about, if you get foot traffic down there, but, that's going to really, really help. We want people who live here to be there.
Right.
I want to see kids with parents with strollers and, all that stuff. But then again, that leads to, we have to be very flexible as a city and ready to move as trends and different things change. And so, do I think it would be a good idea to build all of the apartments for millennials where it's one bedroom, and we need some retired people living down there, some families? That's going to really, really open things up a lot. But of course, that leads to, you want to walk out and get a loaf of bread, a nice baguette. The only place I know right now is go to Helena's Bakery, kind of, which is down in the funk zone, right? So, I want to get some flowers on the way home. I mean, if you look at New York City, these little things pop up, this little flower stand outside. I mean, do they really need, 2,500 square feet of space for a little flower shop? No, of course not.
Right.
But,
Right.
To me, that's what makes the city or a community that we want to be down there and, not just to get food or to drink,
Right.
So
You have to have multiple uses, especially when you have people living. You need people living downtown.
You
You want that. You want people working downtown. You want eyes on the street, and then you create opportunity for all of these other businesses to flourish.
but they'll tell you the people will tell you what they want. I mean,
Right.
it's not, we can't say we're going to have 9 bread shops. I mean, we can't plan that. It's going to come out as very organic, and that's how cities evolve. I mean, again, the obvious place to look is the funk zone. I mean, things just started popping up all over the place, and those businesses, and Amy knows better than anyone here. I mean, you want to make a living. You want to be able to make a living.
Right.
And so to me, you've got to give businesses that opportunity. And I don't think the city has done enough to give businesses the opportunity to really make State Street or Santa Barbara shine like it really should.
So, Amy, what are your thoughts about, re-tenanting, repositioning, some of these buildings that are on State Street?
Yeah. So
Or
many
just
thoughts.
off State as well?
Yeah, just absolutely the whole core, the economy.
Right.
You can, these little zones, Chapala is really popping up. But yeah, to Peter's point, that when Macy's first closed, all of us said, "Oh my, can we please just tear it down and build residential housing?" Because it couldn't be turned into residential for a lot of reasons, structurally, the windows, all of the things. And no, that'll take too long. Well, now it's just sat empty for how many years? Almost a decade. I don't know how long. But I think it's key. I don't know, it's key to have workforce downtown, residential downtown, that mix of all the different age groups. And then the visitor demographic is huge. So that's one thing I would caution the State Street Advisory Committee is often the loudest voices are residents. And we really, our core business district is supported about 80% by tourists. So just always keeping that in mind as well, because we do have a small population here. We don't have enough people to draw on to support this big of a downtown core and business district. But yeah, the micro retailers like you were doing, Marge, at the public market. And I think that landlords are getting more open to that. When we were pitching that before, they were going, "Oh, I don't know, and who's really there and who's in charge," but showing them examples where that works. Hyper local micro retailers. And the other thing that we've been seeing that's doing really well, like the olive oil shop on the 900 block, she's doing better there than she did on Coast Village, because the front's retail, not too much, 1,000 square feet. Then they have online and fulfillment in the back. So these kinds of businesses that are hybrid, And the other thing I think I want everyone to remember is retail means not just shoes and clothes. Retail means cooking schools. Retail means daycare. It can be all of those things that are experiential. Your bread shop, your flower shop. It's not just shopping per se, but it's the services industry as well. So when we broaden our thinking to that, then it looks like we can really populate more easily, the whole block, along with food and beverage, which we have a good collection of.
So, what I'm hearing from the two of you before I go to Peter Lewis is we have this massive obsolete mall downtown that, there's also an opportunity to rethink that and potentially reposition that in a way that we might not have thought about, that this master planning process could help us with. in addition to, really looking at the buildings that are downtown and where do we put housing? Where do we put office? So I think there are some real opportunities here as we move forward with this master planning. Peter Lewis, what are your thoughts?
So I think that, like Amy was talking about, I think there are more hybrid opportunities for local businesses that are naturally going to come downtown, particularly as the rents come down. It's actually interesting. Downtown now, rents are pretty much the same as the outliers, right? It has started to adjust to the reality of high vacancy. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for the retail space, which we still have way too much of, we've discussed, going into lifestyle uses and entertainment uses, educational uses, businesses that are kind of live work where they could have a retail component to it, or maybe not, but the B2B, I think, is going to happen. You already see it on State Street right now. We've got some tech companies located on State Street, and their offices come all the way down to the ground and come off of State Street. That's a really vital activity. And if we could make sure that we are pushing those industries that support a high-paying job and create foot traffic that's going to sustain the retailer. And I think the city should just be real cognizant of that enormous asset. When somebody brings in high-paying jobs, it changes the activity within a block or two. It fundamentally changes the restaurants around them, the other retailers. I do think we're going to lose more and more retailers that are nationally based. And I think Jason and the city should be focused on making improvements so that local businesses can find a way to get processed quickly and to have flexibility in the zoning as well. I mean, we had a great example of that, of a office use trying to go into a restaurant below the freeway last year, and Planning Commission really struggled with it. But that's the type of thing we have to be more flexible. There's just less need for retail. And we have to assume over the next decade, 30–40% of it is no longer going to be that traditional retail.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Well, I was going to ask you, so do you feel when you say that there's too much retail, 30–40% of it will go away? Are you talking directly about the fact that we have this 13-block downtown that we're trying to put retail in? Or are you saying that, we should really look at this in terms of, retail should be clustered? What are you?
So good question, Marge, because essentially what I'm describing is the reality is that the use is going to change radically. So if our zoning and our staff can't find ways to be super flexible in accepting that and facilitating the change, it will just continue to look like it does now. Structurally, if you look at the parcel map of the 13 blocks, many parcels are not only too big, as Peter and Amy have both pointed out, but they're narrow and deep, and some of them with no back access that's of any use. So you've got this long downtown that doesn't have alleyways that are particularly helpful. So Peter's right. if you could redesign this thing, it would be the way to go. Of course, that's not the option. So we have to find a way to incentivize, in my mind, a lot of these, the ownership is highly bifurcated. So it's not like you can easily assemble many of these narrow parcels. It's extremely difficult. And so we're dealing with structural challenges, and then we've got economic changes. Both of those are serious headwinds. So if we can constantly keep that in mind, I think there are solutions. I'm very optimistic just because I believe a sustainable local economy is actually culturally moving that way. I mean, I think in 10 years, we're going to see everyone wants that. They're going to look for it. So I think organically it's going to happen. We just got to make sure that structurally we can help it. Right. And in this way, the State Street Master Plan can really be a huge force in creating the vision where we want to go. If you look at actually in the 20s when they rethought what State Street would look at, it's a lot like I think that could really work. It's pretty vertical along State Street. And it felt very European. So State Street would have been a really wonderful experience. And so I think we get there, but we just got to deal with 2 or 3 really, relentless forces that we have to constantly remind ourselves of.
Right. So one of them is the city creating opportunities that, without giving up, we want to make sure that we're developing and designing as we should be, because we do have rules, but that the city finds a way to fast track this process, and I couldn't agree more with Peter Ruppert about mixes of uses. I mean, I would love to see some co-housing, product types downtown, in addition to apartments. It can't all, micro units, it can't all look the same. I mean, there's a real opportunity in Santa Barbara, I think, to have a mixture of uses. Peter, you were going to add something.
Yeah, a couple things on that. So I agree with Peter completely. I mean, I don't want people to think that this is a one-time change because now the pandemic and now we opened up. Change happens all the time, right? And so we have to be flexible enough, to allow it to happen. And in back to what Amy said, we have to reimagine retail. I mean, Peter's right. We're probably not going to have as many shoe stores, as many clothing stores. That's what people think of when they're thinking of retail, but it's going to be services. It's going to be all kinds of things, that will work. But it's going to be the consumer who tells us what they want. And I'm going to put this on Marge just because I was with Marge, talked to her a lot when she was doing public market. And before the garden, remember that, I forget what it was called. It was like more of a restaurant kind of thing before the garden.
No, it was a grocery store.
Grocery store. It
right.
Didn't do well, right? The garden, I couldn't get in I had to get in the other day to meet some people. It was like jam packed, So well, they told her, no, that's not going to happen. That grocery store, right. But they tell you, and if that place couldn't have been changed quickly, into another use, we're done. So we've got to be ready for that flexibility.
Therein lies, I mean, this is to, really to what you have just said and to what Peter and Amy have also said. I underestimated the market, the Santa Barbara market. I mean, we built the Santa Barbara public market to be like a European style market, right? You could grocery shop, you could eat in, you could go to the butcher, you could go to the baker. And, there are a whole host of reasons why things worked and why things didn't work. But you're right. You had to, the market told us what they wanted. And so that's exactly what we did. And, I want to add one more thing to this discussion, and that is the arts. I think there's a real opportunity for us to have artists living, working, and showing their work downtown, not so different than Vancouver and, you know, different places that you go, you know, even in Europe where you've got the sculptor working in the back, but he's got or she's got their studio up front. That's an opportunity, I think, that we have as well that is absolutely visitor serving. Amy, wouldn't you agree? I mean, it's you know, I mean, I've bought things in Vancouver and brought them, you know, have had them sent home from artists and whatnot.
Yeah, you know, you're preaching to the choir on that one. I love the arts community. And I've been consulting with Santa Barbara Records, who's a new record label here in town. And we've been talking about having kind of a live work. There's a couple of people who would love to record here and record an album here, but you know, how do they live? Kind of a live work cohabitation kind of thing. Again, It goes back to the rent though, and making it, can you monetize that space in a way that then you can pay the rent that the property owner is asking for? But yeah, that thinking about retail differently is such a huge component to this.
Well, and you know, retailers that have brick and mortar, right? But they're also hugely involved in e-commerce. And
that's exactly right. They have the different, well, I've placed 3 businesses in the past couple of months in the 11 and 1200 blocks, and they have smaller spaces up there. So it's been a little bit easier. But one of them in particular has a wholesale business, a direct to consumer business, and then a designer business that they work with designers. So looking for those kinds of retailers that are diversifying, but also knowing that retail is not dead. The stores that I consult with in SLO, they're having some of their best quarters ever. Ojai, best quarter ever. Both of those cities didn't shut their streets down. I mean, back to our original discussion of looking at really what works. And I'm not saying the shutdown's a problem, but it's also not the solution. So like what's working, where, and how are other people doing it so that they do have a healthy, diverse mix of businesses downtown.
Right. Okay. I think these are really great points. Thank you all for
just one point on that.
Sure.
So I was just looking at nationwide employment in retail, you know, compared to beginning of the pandemic and now. If you look nationwide, it's pretty much back to where it was pre-pandemic levels. And that's true for many counties. Santa Barbara, we're still about 10 to 15% below employment in retail. And maybe that goes back to Peter's point about maybe we just had too much retail and we're shaking it out to a new thing.
We have the wrong kind of retail. I don't think we have the right kind of retail. I mean, we could go into that. We could go all down a rabbit hole on that. But you know, the hyper-local, experiential, all the kind of things that people want now, you know, they don't want Nordstrom's. I mean, they never really did. No. The locals did, but we didn't have enough of it. So I think there's not enough, we don't have enough actual interesting dynamic shopping downtown right now.
Well, you know, we can all, I mean, Peter, you showed, you know, Burlingame Avenue, but we can walk down Fillmore Street in San Francisco or Chestnut Street in San Francisco, or, you know, go to the Haight, and it's all hyper local. I mean, there are no, you know, there are no chains really. I mean, maybe 1 or 2, but it's pretty local. Okay, well, great. So my next question, the State Street Master Planning process has the opportunity to define and shape the future of the built environment in downtown Santa Barbara. It's really an opportunity to guide the revitalization, if you will. What are 1 or 2 key topics or issues you think are critical for the master plan to address? And I'm glad that I'm not a panelist, but I am going to give input because I have like 6 things. But you know, what are 1 or 2 things? Peter Lewis, let's start with you.
So the 2 that I know as a builder or somebody that looks at buildings and what I can do and has existing buildings and what I potentially could do with those. The 2 big things I think that would be helpul, the master plan dealt with, and I've spoken about that with our chair and with Tess in particular, is 1 is stormwater. And it's probably the single biggest deterrent to viable projects or quick repurposing of buildings. Because essentially, and a lot of people, it's really getting down into the weeds of development, which is, you know, it's a practical topic that I thought I would bring to you guys, because I see it all the time in the sense that buildings because they're lot line to lot line, they can't treat their stormwater and they can't store their stormwater.
Right.
So we have all these parcels being treated as if they are out in suburbia, and they're not. They're all hemmed in. So I think there's the solution lies with at least the stormwater runoff being more sustainably discharged into whatever we do with State Street. Could, in fact, make repurposing so much easier, or at least economically more viable, because currently it's a real challenge when you want to change something, any of these buildings. The second thing I would do is and I know the city council is dealing with this right now. We have to incentivize, not disincentivize, housing. And there aren't a bunch of projects coming through the pipeline because they don't make economic sense. And until our council decides that they want housing, we aren't going to get the people down there that we need to sustain this downtown. And we have to get real. Is it a real priority or is it just rhetoric? And some of the recent changes, including adoption of getting rid of the community benefit of rental housing projects, is going to also deter rental housing projects. So those would be the two things that I would encourage the city to really get sincere about. And I mean, do they really want the housing down there? Do they want to make it feasible? If they are, repurposing is only going to happen if we deal on all of the issues on a macro level. And
yeah, I think, housing is what makes a city vibrant and sustainable, having people living and working in your city. And it also has to be affordable. And through the planning process, I was not, when we did Alma del Pueblo, I was incentivized to build bigger units. When I went to the city, I'll never forget this, Brian Kernall, I said, I want to build 60 units on this on this site, but I want them to be smaller and affordable by design. But I was, through the planning process, the way that the general plan was, I was incentivized to build bigger units, and it's a LEED Platinum project. So the average size is 1,200 square feet anyway, or 1,100 square feet. We left square footage on the table, but housing is so important. Amy, what are your thoughts in terms of critical?
Yes. So many thoughts, but I guess, for the State Street planning process, mobility and transportation, just the flow, we talk a lot about European cities, and that's lovely, but I don't want to be at war with reality. And we know from data that people will only walk a certain amount before they'll turn around, so just being aware that we are in the United States and we are in a car-centric, world. And so kind of being cognizant of that. And so how do we balance that? So mobility, transportation, flow. And the other thing that I would love to see that I proposed long ago is a brand book. And by that, I mean, we see people stuck trying to get their businesses open because their trash enclosure is in design review for 8 months.
Like a style guide, a style guide.
How hard would that be? Let's get 6 trash enclosures. We all agree on HLC. Let's get 6 heating lamps. Let's get 6 outdoor table patio, whatever it is. Now, if you have a brand and you really want your own special princess trash enclosure, great, you can go through the design review process. It's not that you're stuck on that, but if you want an expedited design review process, is there a way that we can come to an agreement on some of these basic things of how we handle trash enclosure, stormwater, whatever else it is? That's not a design idea. But yeah, so this idea of making the process smoother, and overall, back to what Peter said, making it a business-friendly environment. So as I am right now going out to recruit businesses, it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, because what I'm saying is things have really changed. We're open for business. We're ready to help you. But, you know, we're a little bit ahead, the marketing or the messaging is a little bit ahead of the reality. So making it so that we can be flexible, entrepreneurial, and make a downtown that we all really love and that's dynamic and thriving, and not get too stuck in the old ways of thinking. So those would be some of my main.
Well, and I think, you know, Amy, as you go through the process of working with businesses and finding homes for them, and, you know, you talk about a style guide, you know, businesses also need help in how to go through the process.
Oh,
You know-
oh, I have such good news on that. Sorry. We actually have been working with Jason Harris. We've redone the entire process, rewritten it, and even done a nice little graphic, you know, ready, set, grow, or something like that, I forget, of how to open a business here, and then how to keep it open, and then the resources. So we're making it much, much easier to get the help you need, whether you're already an existing business or you're expanding. And we also just launched a local investment opportunity network to help those businesses that need a little bit, that are the hyper local ones we really want, you know, Oat Bakery, who we love, or Handlebar Coffee, who wants another location. Well, they don't need tech level investment. They need 50,000 or 75,000. So how can we bridge the gap and help our local business owners get their businesses open? So we've also started that.
It's great. Peter Rupert, 2 key topics or issues you think that are critical to the master plan, that the master plan should address?
I mean, I think the key really to me is flexibility, and I'm going to be a little provocative here, but look, the structural issues we've got to take care of. Peter's right on that. That's just, you know, there's no messing around with that. We don't have a choice there. It's just something we have to do. So, you know, I'm going to put that off the table. But I want people to think about, you know, we're all having this vision of what it would look like, a plan. What if there were no master plan? What if there were none? What if there were no what if there was nothing? What would it look like? I mean, I want to know what.
It wouldn't be
here,
Peter.
No, I want to know what, when people are envisioning what this is going to look like 5 or 10 years from now, I really want to know what they have in mind and why we think that we know what retail is going to do. You know, so one of the questions was, you know, what's going to happen to retail? Well, I can tell you what's going to happen to retail. It's going to go nowhere if we don't let it. If we don't get out of the way, it's going to go nowhere. So, you know, other places, it will go somewhere. And here's a quiz I ask people, and because now the way I'm going to ask it, you're going to get it right probably. But, you know, do you happen to know what the share of e-commerce is in total sales in the US? The share of e-commerce in retail?
I thought that 80% of shopping was still done in person.
Yeah,
Is my guess.
more than that.
It's 11% of sales comes from e-commerce. Only 11.
Yeah.
It's not, some people say 70, some people say they think everything they do is, no, retail's here.
Yeah.
Retail's here, and it's going to happen, and we've got to let it happen. So, you know, my view is, again, what do we want State Street or the other places to look like 5 or 10 years from now? The key is flexibility, you know, letting people do what they want. And the second is, I think we really have to promote diversity. I think without diversity, and I can tell you, by the way, if you haven't read, there's a book by Jane Jacobs. You guys know Jane Jacobs?
Oh, very well.
Yeah. She wrote a great book in the 60s called The Death and Life of Great American Cities.
That's right.
She says exactly what not to do for a city, and why cities died, and what cities made it, and how. And I really recommend that book to people, because she was fighting against homogenization by Robert Moses, and you know what that was going to do to New York. And she worked really hard at making a safe, friendly community. And I think that's what's going to drive people. If I'm going to walk down to State Street and I feel it's dangerous, or I feel, you know, I'm not going to State Street. So without some residential down there, families looking out for each other. So flexibility, and then really thinking about what flexibility means in terms of, do we really know what we want?
So you'll be happy to know that Jane Jacobs' book is on our resource list. So I think it's front and center. So what I heard from the three of you was, infrastructure, stormwater, those sorts of things, traffic. One of the things that I didn't hear that I want to throw out there, because I think that it's imperative as we look at the big picture in terms of people downtown, vibrancy, is we need to solve, I'm going to take that back, not solve, we need to create strategies that will help mitigate our issue downtown with homelessness. And I think that is a very key piece so that we do have a sustainable city, and one that is vibrant, but that is also addressing some issues that we have, and addressing it so that, we're not just pushing the problem down the line, but we are addressing it. So I think, that's something that we.
Yeah, Marge, can I ask you that? Because that would have been my number one, is safety and cleanliness, or homelessness, however you want to say it, except for I didn't know if that was under the purview of the State Street Advisory Committee. But I was just talking to the number one person in town who does this kind of work, and he was saying that what he feels is needed is a dedicated State Street team, which would be 2 people that are dedicated to State Street, and then 1 for the waterfront, because those are the 2 most active areas. So, looking at how to make that happen, and it seemed like a very reasonable amount of money to make that happen, and the impact, the ROI on our businesses, on our experience of walking downtown as a community member or as a tourist would be huge. But is that something that's under the SSAC purview?
Well, I think that, as we look at the master plan and we look at, all of the things, I mean, Tess was just saying that, they've come back and they've narrowed the focus a little bit. There are a lot of things to think about, historic resources, these types of issues, infrastructure, sustainability. I mean, I think, sustainability for me should be front and center. I mean, I want to see this city be, not dependent on Southern California Edison. I'd like to see us, working toward a more sustainable future, because that's really how you create vibrancy.
Can I just add one thing to that, Marge?
Sure.
I mean, so there was this old commercial I remember. It was not that old, but where a mom comes into their kid's room, their teenage kid, and she's like, "Oh my God, it stinks in here." And he goes, "I don't smell anything." And she says, "You become nose blind." Well, for a lot of us, and me included, I've kind of become homeless blind, I have to say. I mean, I don't really see it. I brought my sister into town. She hasn't been here in a long time. And she's like, "Oh my God, this is a mess." I don't see it anymore. So, I would encourage, not bringing in consultants from Seattle or anything, but bring in some of your friends who don't really know State Street and walk down and get their opinion. See what other people are saying about what it's like to be on State Street.
So just to sort of wrap this part up, and let's try to keep it brief so that we can get some questions from the SSAC members. What are the economic risks, short-term and long-term? What are the risks of not really looking at this in a holistic way for Santa Barbara, for downtown specifically? Amy?
Oh, okay. I was like waiting for you to pick. It's like the teacher. The concern that I have is that no matter what kind of plan we come up with, and you hire a consultant and it's 2 years until the plan and then we're implementing it, we need action now. We need short-term strategies now. Of course, we need a long-term strategy for whatever that's worth. To Peter's point, things change so much, but it's urgent, I believe, with our vacancy rate so much higher than other, Ventura has almost a 0 vacancy rate. Other towns are handling it differently. And to me, it does go back to us not having an economic development department, as other towns have. We have Jason Harris, God bless him, but he's only one man, So looking at the holistic economic development needs of our core business district and how that core business district serves our entire community in sales tax and a lot of other things. And not just if people say, oh, I never go downtown. It still affects your property taxes and it still affects your parks and schools. And, so really getting people to understand and care and be invested in our downtown. So I think we're at risk right now if we don't act quickly on homelessness, cleanliness, safety, and some other key fundamental issues so that we can repopulate with intention. To your point, Marge, at the very beginning, like, let's look at this as the great earthquake. Okay, great. Okay, we have a high vacancy rate. Great, then let's repopulate it. Not that we have the power to wave a wand, but let's really put effort into revitalizing our downtown in a way that works.
Right, no dumb ideas.
Hey, Marge, these are all great comments. Let's go to the committee because I think we're going to get into a lot of this stuff when we go to questions and answers.
Okay, great.
You want to handle that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
And we have to see if people have their hands up. Let me go to a gallery view here.
Yeah, so just as we're kind of getting settled, if people have questions, if you want to use the raise hand button, and then that way we can kind of call on each person.
If you see a hand and I don't see it, Tess. Oh, Kristen Miller.
Yes, Kristen.
I actually just want to, this has been terrific, by the way. Absolutely great. Love every word of it. I just want to respond to your last question about I think that was an excellent question. What are the economic risks of the decisions we make about this? And I don't have any good scientific data to give. Maybe Peter Rupert could, but I will be the voice of business to say it's dire. Okay, the economic risk of what we do in relation to retail, housing, and commercial that's all being discussed here is pretty bad, because before the pandemic, we were really addressing this in a pretty dramatic way as far as the chamber and other business groups looking at high vacancy rates, the dramatic turnover that we all saw with retail exiting. And there were other problems as well. The closing of State Street and the emergency measures that were taken due to the pandemic did create some very positive economic results. But as Amy said, don't let us forget that the underlying issues that got us into that situation, COVID notwithstanding, do still exist. And I'm proud that we're here today talking about it and taking both the big view and the small view. But I did just want to say it's not just the risk is not just to a handful of property owners or even business owners downtown. It's really to our whole local economy and the people who live here and the quality of life that we lose if we don't figure out exactly what we're talking about today. And that is to make the economy work. So then the downtown works, and then that flows out to the entire region. I say it all the time. I'm, here for the chamber from Goleta to Carpinteria because it matters to them as well. This is all of our hometown. This is all of our downtown.
Right. So I've got 3 hands up. I'm going to go Ken Saxon, Diane Meister, and Robin Elander. Ken?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you to Marge and to all the panelists. This has been really informative. I've been really intrigued about the discussion about sort of planning or not planning, with the focus on flexibility and being so that the city is better able to facilitate change, the change that wants to happen. And so I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts about how this master planning process could be utilized to potentially increase that kind of flexibility.
So let me take a shot at that. I mean, this isn't the first plan. So Peter Lewis probably knows this better than anyone. And by the way, we have a bunch of plans at UCSB in the museum of some old plans of Santa Barbara from the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, where there are fountains in the center, you know, there's all kinds of things. I mean, and we're kind of reinventing the wheel once again, which I completely agree that this is dire. I mean, you know, we got to do something fast. On the economic part of that, and probably everybody doesn't want to hear this, but I wouldn't spend a penny on a consultant. What would I do? I would get some of the smartest people we know. Peter Lewis is one of them. You know, people from the Tobes Group, maybe people from banks. These guys are going to really tell you what it is that we need to do and can do it without spending. Peter Lewis would be more than happy to donate his time. Sorry, Peter, I'm putting you on the spot. And I think there are lots and lots of people out there who are genius. I've talked to them all the time, and you know, so I would really call on our community to say, listen, we want to listen to you, and here's your charge, and go with it. I really wouldn't, when I heard these numbers like 800,000 and things like that, I think we've got better use for the money, but it's going to take years to get through. It's going to take years to get through all that. And I think that's what Amy said, but that's my 2 cents.
So Ken, I just would like to add, you know, to what you were asking, you know, the community, I mean, I think as you go through this process, there needs to be many facilitated community meetings with different stakeholders that will tell you exactly what you're asking. You know, what is it that you want this community to be? And I think Peter, you know, to your comment, Peter Rupert, you know, this isn't just about, you know, who do we put downtown and those sorts of things. I mean, I think there are some real economic development and transportation infrastructure issues that need to be solved as well. And you know, I think having a third party working with our community. I mean, I'm watching the master planning process in downtown Pasadena right now, and they have really engaged the community in a way that's really pretty masterful. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the result of that is. But I think, you know, the community also needs to be very engaged. The people that are going to rent these spaces need to be engaged. Okay, Diane.
Thanks. I think my question's pretty similar to Ken's, but I come from a little bit of a different perspective. So I spent my career running the planning or working for and running the planning department for the county of Santa Barbara. And we, you know, traded positions with the city on whose process was easier over my career. And I'm just really curious to know what people mean when they say the city, and when I say city, I mean the staff and city council, what they need to do to increase flexibility and encourage the kind of development we want to see downtown. I mean, what couple of things need to happen? Because there have been tons of studies at the city and the county about the process and how to improve it, and it hasn't hit the mark. So how do we get there? Because I think that aside from the plan that we come up with is going to be pretty critical to implementation of whatever vision we agree to as a community.
Amy, why don't you?
I think that's a Peter Lewis would be better equipped to answer that question.
Okay, Peter.
I think the city, I can't speak to the county so much, but I can speak to the city. I think the city is actually making those strides. But there are, the process can get myopic, and it can, these silos of authority that create these friction points. So, hopefully the new community development director is going to find a way where flexibility comes with authority. And I think we've got systems that actually would work if there's somebody you could go to and ask, can't we find a different solution this time because of this? The problem I see right now is that there's too many silos with too many separations of authority, and nobody wants to challenge anybody. And I think that culture is changing. So it's going to come from leadership within the city. And I'm encouraged, but I think if we can constantly make efforts to review that process, see where we have issues, and make sure that we're constantly being attentive to the results. In other words, back to Amy's original point on some things that are kind of crazy. Why are we redesigning trash enclosures, for instance? There are some ways I think that we can make it simpler for people to open businesses. This change is going to happen organically. And we just want to make sure the city is not the problem. They've got to be the solution. So I'm encouraged. I think there's a lot of effort to look at the culture in the city. I think they've made some process improvements, but I think that if it's about a committing to timelines, and I think they can be improved yet again. The problem is, like all these processes now are much more complicated than they used to be. So it's really hard to get as fast as any of us in this business want to be. But all we can do is try.
Marge, you might just note, Bob Tueller has joined us a little late, but his face is down in the corner.
Hey,
and
Bob.
Peter.
I just wanted to quickly second what Peter said. I think City Council and others have made great strides. I'm very encouraged as well. I think it's been fantastic, much more responsive than before. So I'm certainly encouraged.
That's great. Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
I was going to say, I agree that the city and the new community development director and all of that seems to be humming along. It seems to be the design review process, and in particular the HLC, and that does affect downtown quite a bit. So that seems to be where the game is held up, as my granddad would say. So I'm not sure if there's improvements that could be made in that, which, because what I've heard is it is incredibly subjective and, takes a long time. And so looking at the HLC charter, it's a charter. And so when we've brought up changes to it, the pushback is that's in the charter, and changing the charter is a huge deal. But let's try to think innovatively, and maybe there's some changes we could make at this time.
Thank you, Amy. Bob, do you have anything to add to that in terms of, I know you just went through this experience with your new building downtown. You're on mute. There we go.
Late and on mute.
There you go.
I think our building process started prior to the changes happening. So I don't think I can make a comment of what's happened over the last 18 months. On hearing that things have changed, I think from the perspective that I hear from tenants or the people that I have dealt with, there is no perception that I've heard of that the process has made changes. I have seen some changes, small ones, but I don't think that's the perception that our communities have, that very many of our developers have. Peter, you've got the STAR project right now that everyone wants to go through. So if you don't get it streamlined, then nothing's going to be streamlined. So I guess that would be my comment is it takes a while for people and architects to really start being aware of whatever changes are made and for it to get out and be known that.
Okay, thanks for that, Bob. I've got Robin's hand up, and then I'm going to go to Michael. He was next, Hillary, and Nadra. I hope I can remember that order, and then Ed Lenvik. So go ahead, Robin.
Thank you so much, Marge, and thanks to the great panel that has been speaking today. A lot of really great points have been made. I want to echo some of the things that have been said. Particularly, I do feel that this is a pretty critical time to explore the risks involved right now. In the past 3 or so months, a lot of businesses have hung on quite some time, but Omicron has, up until this past month, has killed off a lot of businesses. I think people just had so much difficulty and such a roller coaster over this time that a number of more businesses either have closed in the past weekend or the past several weeks or will be closing in the upcoming weeks. And so I think what we need to really focus on are all the things that we can do to make downtown in the short term as absolutely as vibrant, as safe, as clean as possible, and also move the process as quickly as possible for those that want to reopen businesses. There are quite a number of businesses that have expressed interest in coming into town over this past 2 years during the pandemic, and some of them sadly have not been able to open or have not gotten much response from their calls to property management companies. And so there are quite a lot of things that we need to do to dial in and really create an easier place to do business downtown. I also want to just echo the dedicated team of case management folks for homelessness. I think that is absolutely critical and could go a long way. Another key thing that was brought up is security and having a shared private security team, particularly for the private businesses, not necessarily to patrol the city streets, but this would be a cost-effective way for businesses to proceed. Activations regularly, that's an area that my organization as well as with the city are looking to ways that we can increase the amount of activities. I want to explore ways to bring back the shuttle and or a tram or rickshaw or something very uniquely Santa Barbara to a people mover, because that is something many businesses have brought up on the regular. Housing is critical to make sure that we build as soon as possible. And then high level cleaning and guidelines for use are absolutely critical. And then lastly, figuring out where we can be flexible and making that happen. I do see challenges come into place with the historic landmarks and the planning commission to be able to actually move things along in the way that we want to. So I think we need to discuss where we want some flexibility and how to find it. So thank you, and I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Robin. And we're getting a little short on time. I want to make sure everybody has time to speak. So Michael, you're next.
Thanks, Marge. And I echo everybody else, and great panel. First, I'd like to just say I'm neutral on the topic, but I'm curious of the panelists' thought on, and I've heard, Ventura, I've heard HLC. Does Santa Barbara's architectural style downtown, is that support the economic sustainability of downtown? Or is it a burden? Is it a benefit? I don't know what the answer is, but when you talk of, I heard Ventura a couple of times, 100% occupancy. Ventura is a sign of the times. If you go downtown, it's very organic downtown, that buildings were built according to the style of when they were built. Whereas Santa Barbara kind of chooses one style and sticks with it. I'm just curious, is it a benefit or is it a burden?
Michael, I'm sorry, Peter Lewis.
Well, again, I think Ventura again, it really comes back to inventory, and Bob Tuller may really be able to talk about this. We just have too much space that doesn't have a economic purpose. That's the fundamental, Michael. I mean, if our downtown core was a little smaller and we had a lot less retail, we'd be vibrant. We have too much, and we got to repurpose it. And it's really that fundamental. It's a structural challenge that has all sorts of guardrails, unfortunately, that people are very emotional about sticking to. One is like height limits, right? Santa Barbara for years was 60 feet. And some of our most landmarked and revered buildings are 60 feet tall. But somehow that got pushed to 45 feet. And now that is an economic burden when you redevelop. So we have to, if we're going to have too much buildings that can't have a purpose because of where they stand in the block and the parcel that they sit on, they're going to stay that way unless we can find a way to reuse them. And a lot of those are the narrow single-story buildings of structural limitations. So
thank you, Peter.
Santa Barbara's unique in that way, Michael. I'd say it's.
Can I also just say something real quick? Is that to your point about is it a constraint? I mean, I had a local owner who had a really cute, tiny property with a mid-century modern roof, and he was required to make it tile, Spanish tile. There was really no reason for it to be Spanish tile. It was a great looking roof. It had been there forever. So there is the fear, you know, we don't want to try to be the Spanish Solvang or try to force this kind of like Disneyland, you know, homogeneous look everywhere. We want to honor the historic buildings and honor some new ideas as well. So I think the idea more is like, how does the HLC function, and how can it function in a way that it does protect what we want to protect, but it allows some room for growth and flexibility.
Yep. I think that's right. I mean, you can go to historic districts all over the country and the world and look at new buildings that represent this time, how they've integrated with lots of historic buildings. Okay, Hillary, I think you were next.
Yeah, thanks for all of your, you know, everything everyone shared. I have a question and a statement. My question I want to hear from the panelists on is, you know, we're talking about all different uses downtown, and you know, the focus of this has really been on retail, but we've talked about housing and all that, and just looking at this sort of update, Cosmont update having to do with office space, right? And so before the pandemic, it seemed like, oh, okay, Amazon just opened office space. There's more office space coming downtown. It's people on the street getting lunch, going to happy hour after work. And then COVID happened, and now they're like all working from home. And so, you know, that's a question, right? That almost seemed like a middle ground, right? There's housing, you know, if somebody lives there, they're going to be on the street. You know, if someone was going to the office, they'd be on the street, you know, a couple times a day. Now it seems those businesses, especially the growing businesses, tech businesses, like not so much. And so unfortunately that Cosmont report like doesn't really mention the fact that the pandemic. So, you know, it's hard to predict these things, and I'm curious what you all think about that. You might have a different answer today than you did 2 years ago. And then one thing I just wanted to mention, since Mr. Rupert said, you know, housing for millennials, just as a reminder, millennials are about, you know, 25 to 40 years old. So we're not all just like super young. I'm an older millennial. We're not all looking for one bedroom apartments. We've been talking about millennials for 10 years, but now we're all 10 years older. So we do have families. We are looking for places to live downtown. So it's not just your, you know, your young niece who's on her phone all the time. We have jobs and lives and families. So just want to put in a plug for
No, maybe you misheard me. That I was saying what you were saying, that, you know, that we don't want just one bedroom places for that. Yeah, that's not at all what I was saying. I mean, but
yeah, I just wanted to define the generation a little better, give a little update on that. But anyway, my question about office space, I'm curious what
Yeah, so
what your thoughts are.
I have been talking to lots of real estate people, you know, all over the U.S. And I think most of the real estate companies, they're not banking on everybody working from home. They don't see much of a change a few years from now in the amount of people, you know, they're going to be more flexible. You're right. They're going to maybe work 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. A lot of places are 4 days in the office, 1 at home. But I personally don't think that we're going to see a massive change in everybody just works at home. I think that's a bit overblown.
So I'd like to hear Bob Tueller's response to this, because, you know, I know that, in fact, I just got it in an alert. You know, San Francisco's lost about $10 billion in commercial real estate values over the last 2 years. So I would be interested in what Bob has to say about commercial office and the viability as it relates to downtown. You're on mute, Bob. You're on mute. There you go.
Thanks, Marge. The office vacancy rate in Santa Barbara, and a lot of this is downtown, is at 9.2%. That is the highest it's been in the last 20 years. And I can only do that because my graph only goes back 20 years. But it's one of the, it's either at or near its all-time highs. One of the things that I've seen happen to a couple older office buildings is them get leveled. That's what happened in where we put our offices and mixed-use project. Over up on Mission Street, there was some junky offices that were barely getting $2 a square foot gross, and they were totally renovated with really nice apartments. 18 West Mission, I think is the address. And they rented out pretty quickly, and all of a sudden a dumpy office building was converted into a real nice apartment building. One of the things that I've had these developers contact me here over the last year is asking me not about prime office space, but the office spaces that are closer to, they get like $2 a square foot gross, because those sell for a lot less per square foot. They're selling for probably closer to $300 a square foot or less, that they can come by, do a apartment conversion. And actually on this one project on Mission, I was told by the developer that the city of Santa Barbara worked very well with them on that conversion and was encouraging me to do it on a project that I'm representing. So I do think that we're going to see more of that, not to the vastness of the scale that to make a big dent, but every time I see a office building come off the market and converted to anything but office, I think is helping our downtown, because it adds preferably residential and we don't need as much office. Peter Lewis mentioned we have too much retail spaces downtown. I agree with him on that. I thought back in the 1980s was the worst that State Street ever was. And it wasn't until the Paseo Nuevo went in that it turned around State Street. Well, State Street now is worse than it ever was in the 80s. So we're not just at a bad time because of COVID. We've surpassed all that, and State Street deterioration has been going over the last 10 years. So I know we blame a lot on COVID. I feel that this process of the deterioration in downtown State has been a 10-year process. I have also seen on State Street, I think Amy brought up that it's hard to convert these narrow retail buildings Some of them are, one of the narrowest ones that I ever sold was 30 feet by 200 feet. And it was hard to rent to retailers. It ended up being the Unity shop that bought it. But so we're starting to see tenants that normally would not have even considered retail on State because the rents were too high. So we're starting to get tenants that were over on Chapala Street, De La Vina Street, in other parts of town where they can now go rent something on State Street for $2 a square foot, or that used to be what Upper De La Vina or Mission Street might have been. So we're seeing change happen, whether it's better or not. But when you have 40 downtown vacancies, that's 40 spaces from Gutierrez to Sola Street. We're not at all-time highs. We did get up to, I think, about 48 pre-COVID, and it actually improved during COVID up until the end of 2021. And I think that had a lot to do with the closing down of State Street.
Thank you, Bob.
Was that a
Yeah,
long-winded answer?
No, I think.
Yeah, Bob and Peter, could I push back on one thing? You guys both are saying we have too much retail. And I think what you're saying is we have too much property designated for retail, like Macy's and Nordstrom's. We do not have too many retail operators downtown. That's not what you're saying, is it?
No, too many retail buildings.
Right.
That's what I thought. Okay, so just to be clear, because you keep saying we have too much retail, we don't actually have enough good shopping, but we have too many buildings designated for that.
Right.
Hey, Marge, let's take those last two people, Nadra and Ed, and we'll have to cut it off.
Yes, okay. Nadra, you're next.
Thank you. So I just want to thank everyone on the panel. It's been a great discussion. It makes me think of the saying, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you have to start with one bite, because there are so many different aspects to revitalizing, and what does that even mean to revitalize State Street? And as we're talking, the thoughts that come to the surface, it speaks to the flexibility and really being able to streamline the process for business owners and how we can do that, but also creating, as to Peter's statement about Jane Jacobson, creating that space that's safe, that has that cleanliness, that has that feel, that invites people, and really having that dedication to maybe that State Street team for homelessness, and making sure that cleanliness and safety is paramount. And then also I think about the sustainability aspect, the stormwater aspect, and maybe if there's ways to incorporate economic development into the development of sustainability infrastructure. But the one thing I wanted to switch to a question is, we talk about the mom and pop business owners, we talk about incentivizing housing. What flows to the top of my head is, how is this affordable? Because a lot of times it's the streamlining of the process, but it's also the rents that the store owners and business owners have to pay, the rent for housing. And so is it really feasible to have, and not affordable programs, but just affordable for local, residents, people that work in hospitality, people that work in retail and things like that? Like, how can we create a viable downtown housing and for mom and pop business owners that is affordable for these parts of our community?
So who wants to answer that? And then we've got one more advisory committee member that wants to ask a question. Peter, you want to take that?
Which Peter?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Peter Rupert.
Sure. I mean, Bob, I think, said it best. I mean, look, we had 40 some vacancies. Those vacancies happened because people weren't providing the right mix of things. Rents come down. As I was saying, Burlingame Avenue when I was there, had one vacancy. I don't imagine the rents are lower in Burlingame Avenue. I just can't believe that than in Santa Barbara. I mean, on State Street. So, I think that is completely viable. I mean, at $2 a square foot, like Bob was saying, they used to be on Upper Delvini where no one was coming. So the rents have come down, and the rents will equilibrate until, right? I mean, we have the right kind of mix of shops. I always thought it was more about the, forcing businesses to go through a year of waiting to get permits, having to spend money and not receive a penny for over a year.
Right.
That's what kills them. I mean, these are mom and pop shops that have to get in and start making money, right away. And that's what I want to see.
No, you're right on there, Peter. I think that's exactly right. And Nadra, also, I think that, it's supply and demand, right? If we build the right type of housing, you create supply. And I think that there's an opportunity for rents to start to go down. So
I do think workforce is a huge issue that we don't even want to, we're not even going to get into here, but that was a very good question. And it's key. And the restaurants right now are struggling to hire. Yeah.
It really is. Okay, Ed.
Yeah, thank you. I apologize. I wasn't able to get to the meeting until about 5:15, so I missed a good portion of it, and I will watch it to make sure I give proper consideration to everything that's been said. I have not so much a question, although I think it can be converted into a question, but I kind of wonder if, Peter Lewis or Bob Tuller or other realtors walk down State Street today with a potential retail client. Maybe it's a men's shop, or maybe it's a woman's shoe shop, or maybe it's, whatever. Someone walking down State Street today, looking at what is there, are they going to say, gosh, this is attractive, I want to get into this right away? Or are they going to say to themselves, awful lot of plywood and 2x4s on State Street right now, and I don't find my shop in that mix of stuff that is running, 800, 900, 1,000, 1,100 block of State Street. And I think that's part of the problem, and that's what we're hoping that the urban planner will bring to this. I think if we're asking the urban planner to solve a problem of homelessness or vagrancy or all those other things, we're asking way too much. We need an urban planner to tell us what is going to be attractive, what is going to be enjoyable, what is going to get businesses excited, what's going to get the local residents excited, what's going to get the tourists excited. And I really believe that we don't have that opportunity now, and we can talk till we're blue in the face, and Bob Tuller can show tenants up and down State Street until his shoe leather wears out, and you're not going to find people, in my opinion, interested in committing to leasing space in the present environment we have. Now, tell me if I'm wrong on that, Peter Rupert or Peter Lewis or Bob Tuller.
How about Bob Tuller? I know his shoe leather's worn out. Unmute yourself, Bob.
Bob doesn't learn too quick here.
Yeah, that's right. There's so many different dynamics that have affected State Street that I see have directly caused tenants to not go to State Street. And I'll just give a couple of them. I had a gentleman who had 3 retail stores down in Oxnard and Ventura wanting to open State Street. And he was very excited, looked at the shop 2 times, brought up his wife to show the shop. And as we're walking up to the shop, there was a vagrant sleeping down in front of the door. And the guy said, you know what, I'd rather go over to Milpas. So he leased the store over on Milpas. So he did come to Santa Barbara, but he felt Milpas was a safer, better location for him than the 1,000 block of State Street. Another problem that I see there's quite a few owners, I have a couple of them myself, who they don't even care if they rent their building. So in the 10-hour block, in one of those reports, it said that like some of the worst buildings on State, and I got 2 of them for lease. And I talked to the owner, and there's a lot of out-of-town owners who they just are making no effort to try to lease their space, where we bring them proposals and they just go, you know what, that's too low, even though what we're bringing them is market. I'm just going to do nothing, and I'm going to wait until State Street turns around. And if it takes 5 years, I don't care if I keep my building vacant for 5 years. I own it free and clear, and it's been in the family for a long time. And that's, I don't know how we get around that. I don't think there's any, or I think there's been a limited effort to try to reach out-of-town owners, or I call them generational out-of-town owners, who inherit the properties and they don't really care that much. It's a tough one because I have a couple of them and I lobby them all the time. You need to fix up your store or just do a lease at fair market value as today, which is much less. They remember the $450 a square foot triple net deals that I did for them 15 years ago on State Street. And the idea of having to do a $2 a square foot triple net deal now, they just refuse to do it. So out of those 40 vacancies, I bet 10 of those are caused because of owners. Unwillingness to lease their space at market, to do upgrades that need to be done to market, to clean their buildings up. So
that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Marge, my comment to Tuller is that, one, vagrancy is a policing problem, not a planning problem. We can argue that a lot, but if that vagrant is there, it needs to be policed. And two, and I've talked to some city staff about this. If you have legacy owners who aren't going to budge, then you ought to tax them. You ought to penalize them for vacancies. Now, I'm told they can't do that in our day and age, but there's got to be some incentive for them to rent.
Well, they are in San Francisco, and they're getting ready to pass that downtown for buildings that aren't being leased. But listen,
also, one more thing. Ed, I do have people, I talk to people every week who are looking to come to Santa Barbara and want to lease here. So there is still a lot of interest, but the number one problem is homelessness that turns them off. And the number two is they say, I don't want to lease until I know what you're doing with this promenade. And the fact that we don't have an answer to whether it's staying or not staying, and parklets or not parklets, and shut down or not shut down, is turning off retailers for sure.
Well, we are on our way. We've launched. And I just want to say thank you to Peter Rupert, Peter Lewis, Amy Cooper, Bob Tuller, and all of the SSAC folks. We were the guinea pigs. I hope we did okay. And
Marge, no, you did wonderful. And Marge, thank you, Marge, for putting it together. Putting it together, make it happen. Just a little note, I got to shoot in a little bit of history for all of you. Where were you guys 40 years ago when I was holding these sessions for downtown? Because
I was in Santa Barbara.
Because Peter's, again, Peter Lewis, thank you for name checking me on the 18 months for a 4-story building from permit to construction, right? Thank you for that. 40 years ago, we were doing the same kind of visioning process we're doing here. And we, staff, basically said we want to have essentially a mix of pedestrian and cars downtown. That's what the retailers wanted. We wanted to basically have local businesses. We basically wanted to distribute the retail with a couple anchors and use State Street as the mall and not do a mall. People came out of the woodwork and said, no, we don't want to drive to Oxnard. We don't want to drive to Thousand Oaks. We want Nordstrom and Macy's here. We need to have, they actually went to the ballot in order to force essentially a department store type development downtown in that regard.
Dave,
wait, let me just finish. And everything has about a 30-year lifespan in terms of economics, right? And so again, and Bob Tuller brought out, right? State Street was a mess in the 70s and 80s. Absolutely. The only thing that was good was the things above Figueroa, La Arcada and above, right? Built Paseo Nuevo, downtown basically blossomed in that regard, and it went through its life cycle. I'm just bringing it back to the fact that we are now looking 30 years out, just as we were back in the 80s. And we need to get away from thinking about what's happening expressly today. And I'll just go back to, again, if I had to look at this, right? There's going to be changing in retail, changing in the work environment, changing the economics, changing in the politics of this country, all within that 30-year period of time, such that going to whoever said it, Peter Rupert, Peter Lewis, and everybody said it, flexible, 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 and get out of the way and try to make things happen. So I'm just going to close with that for now.
Dave, I would just like to say one more thing, and that is I want to thank you and Ken and Tess for your leadership in making this panel happen. So thank you.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. And again, that kind of leads me into our last item, so we can close here. We will now next be meeting on Monday, March 21st. I think we're still in Zoom mode at this point, but sometime in the late spring, hopefully we'll get into a room and be able to see each other in person. Next meeting, we're looking at essentially bringing together a similar discussion of the economic strategies of our three major business organizations, Visit Santa Barbara, the Chamber, and downtown organizations. So Robin and Kristen, and we'll basically be looking and talking to you about how we might do that. Tess, I have to go to public comment at this point before I close this item. Greta?
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to call public comment. I do not see that any members of the public have raised their hand. Just a quick reminder, if you wish to make public comment, please click the hand icon once, and I'll call on you to speak. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. And there are no raised hands. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Tess, any final comments from staff?
You covered them really well, Dave. So the next panel will be working with Kristen and Robin, and I'm really looking forward to that. And then looking at the future, other potential items that will be taking a similar format will be on potentially on housing, arts, culture, and civic life, mobility, sustainability, and potentially a discussion on cleanliness and safety as well. And then just a highlight that we may move, I will keep everybody posted on meeting format, but we may move to more of an in-person format in an April timeframe. So just keep your eyes out for that notice, and I'll let you know if that happens.
Okay,
otherwise, I'll see you all on March 21st.
Thank
you.
I
want to give this, personally, I want to give a thank you to Amy, Peter, and Bob. Bob, I wish you would have come in earlier, bud, but yeah, it was great to have you here. So four of you, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
guys,
Thank you very much.
We'll see you soon.
Very cute kids, Megan. Very cute kids. Thank you for showing them. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.